Homeless veteran was put on trial, but the judge went silent when he heard his name. The sky over New York was heavy, gray. Under that rain, a man walked silently. Michael Harris. His coat was torn to shreds, patches of mud clinging to the fabric, a musty stench rising from him as if his body itself was decaying with time. He stopped in front of the courthouse gate. The cold bronze sign reading, New York State Courthouse, blurred under the falling rain. Michael pulled his worn-out baseball cap deeper over his head, took a deep breath, and pushed the door open. Inside the courtroom, all eyes turned toward him at once. Disgust, contempt, and a touch of mockery were evident on every face. A woman in a purple velvet dress stepped back, covering her nose. A man in a black trench coat grimaced and looked away. Michael walked slowly past them, the mud from his tattered shoes dripping onto the polished stone floor. "God, he smells awful," a young woman whispered, moving closer to her mother. Michael heard it all. His ears burned with shame. He silently took a seat in the defendant's chair, clutching his dry, stiff hands together. No one in that room, those strangers, knew anything about him. And they didn't want to. The gavel slammed down. "Order," a sharp voice rang out. The man holding the gavel was Judge Albert Grant, tall and lean, his face stern like carved stone. From the prosecutor's table, Ryan Owens sprang to his feet. His black suit was impeccable, his red tie bold against a white shirt. His eyes gleamed with cold hostility. "Your Honor, we are here today to deal with an intolerable case," Ryan began, his voice as sharp as a blade. "The defendant, Michael Harris, is a burden to society, a man who failed even to save himself. He is not only a threat to public safety but also a symbol of moral decay." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Michael sat motionless, though his heart felt as if it were being squeezed tight. He glanced sideways at his attorney, Marina Dawson, who held a stack of papers but didn't look at him even once. Ryan stepped forward, pointing straight at Michael. 3 days ago, in a drunken frenzy, the defendant attacked security guard Joseph Louis Monroe at Sunrise Mall. Why? Simply because he was asked to leave the premises. He paused, letting the accusation sink in. A woman in a beige raincoat gasped. "Heavens, that's horrible. What more needs to be said?" Ryan continued, his tone laced with sarcasm. "A man who once served, yes, a veteran of the Bosnian War, is now nothing more than a starving ghost. A danger to everyone around him." Marina rose quietly, her voice barely audible. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges his wrongdoing and is willing to accept a suitable punishment." Michael glared at her, his chapped lips moving. "No. That's not true," but his words vanished into the air. Marina had already bowed her head, avoiding his gaze. "We rest our case," Ryan said, adjusting his lapels. Albert gave a cold nod. "Does the defendant wish to speak in his own defense?" Michael stood, his hands trembling. I just want to." He's about to make excuses. Ryan cut him off, swinging his hand so hard that a few raindrops still clinging to his hair flew off. The court shouldn't waste time on meaningless justifications. A few snickers echoed from the back of the room. Michael's eyes stung. From the spectator seats, a young police officer in uniform whispered to his colleague. "Why not just throw him straight into a mental hospital?" The other shrugged. "Not worth the taxpayers' money." Another bang of the gavel. "Defendant, sit down," Albert ordered. Michael slumped into the chair, his head bowing so low it nearly touched his knees. The musty stench from his soaked coat intensified. Ryan smirked, a sly fox pleased that his prey was caught. From the rear door, Officer Paul Green entered carrying a torn plastic bag filled with Michael's belongings, an old backpack, a faded military jacket, a small photo frame with a broken corner. "The defendant's possessions," Paul said, dropping the bag on the table like garbage. Michael stared at the backpack, pain piercing his chest. He mouthed the words, whispering, please don't. That's all I have." No one responded. Ryan rolled his eyes in visible disgust. Court clerk Lucy Martin read the charges in a mechanical tone. Michael Harris, charged with assaulting a law enforcement officer and disturbing the peace. Recommended sentence, 3 years in prison. The gavel struck again. Albert declared, "The court will recess for 30 minutes before delivering the verdict." Michael sat frozen, eyes locked on the floor. People began to leave the courtroom, the clatter of their shoes on the cold stone sounding like blades cutting into him. A young boy holding a red umbrella asked his mother, "Mom, why is that man so dirty?" The mother hurried him along, whispering, "Don't look, honey. He's a bad man." Michael heard every word. Each whisper sliced into him like a knife. In the corner, Assistant Officer Henry Morales nudged his partner, sneering, "Looks like we've got something new to laugh about at the bar tonight." "Yeah, more stories about the garbage of society," the other replied. Michael quietly closed his eyes. He remembered Bosnia. Remembered those freezing nights beside his fellow soldiers, sharing every sip of water, every bullet. Remembered the grateful eyes of the children he saved during a shelling in Sarajevo. And now, here he was despised, abandoned. On the table, the old backpack lay soaked with rainwater, crushed and deformed like his life. 30 minutes later, the bell rang to reconvene the session. Michael Harris stood quietly at the defendant's stand, his hands icy cold. The rain outside still poured, gusts of wind slipping through cracks in the courtroom and chilling the room. Judge Albert Grant entered, his black robe billowing with each heavy step. He took his seat, expression unreadable. Ryan Owens was different. He stood up eagerly, voice triumphant. "Your Honor, I believe there is no need for further evidence. The defendant is a public menace, and the punishment must be severe to serve as a warning." Albert gave a stiff nod. "The court hereby sentences Michael Harris to 3 years in prison at Southfield Correctional Facility. Effective immediately." The gavel struck coldly. Michael stood stunned. His lips quivered as he tried to speak, "Please. Your Honor, just one word." Albert replied coldly, "The court has delivered its sentence. This session is concluded." Officer Paul Green stepped forward and handcuffed Michael with rough force. "Let's go, old man." Michael stumbled forward, dragging his feet across the cold floor. His backpack still sat abandoned on the clerk's desk. He looked back, whispering, "The backpack, please let me take it." Ryan Owens shrugged, sneering, "Confiscated. Items related to the crime will be stored." "No. It's not a crime item," Michael pleaded. "It's a keepsake, please don't take it." No one replied. The second officer, Stephen Ross, a burly man with dark skin, snapped, "Move it, you piece of trash," and yanked Michael as if dragging a bag of garbage. In that moment, Michael felt himself shatter into 100 pieces. He was no longer a person. Just worthless debris. The noise in the courtroom rose. Some reporters had their cameras ready, flashes capturing the humiliating scene. "Look at him, like a beggar," a young woman in the crowd said to her boyfriend, both laughing. Michael staggered after the two officers, mud from his shoes streaking across the clean floor. He whispered in despair, "I just want my backpack, please." Paul snapped, "Shut up," and shoved him so hard Michael nearly fell forward. In that instant, security guard Joseph Louis Monroe, the one Michael had clashed with, was present. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, face triumphant. As Michael passed, Joseph smirked. "Good luck in prison, old man." Michael looked up at him. His eyes showed no anger, no hatred, only pain. In the rear hallway, Officer Stephen Ross grabbed his radio and muttered, "Inmate Harris ready for transport. Stand by." Vehicle 3, South Wing, a female voice replied. It was the duty officer that day, Claire Walker. Rain blew in through a broken window, making the tile floor slick. Michael slipped, falling to his knees. Paul scowled. Get up. No more games. Michael crawled to his feet. Whether his eyes held rain or tears, no one could tell. A shadow approached. It was a young rookie cop, David Morgan. He looked at the scene, lips pressed tight. For a moment, David hesitated. But the sharp glance from his superior Stephen made him lower his gaze, saying nothing. Michael saw it all. That silent complicity chilled him more than the storm outside. In the back lot, a white prison transport van waited. Rain streaked the logo, Correctional Management Authority. Stephen shoved Michael up the van steps. Move it. Michael turned his head one last time. Through the blurry curtain of rain, he saw the backpack lying abandoned on the courtroom table, unnoticed by anyone. My backpack, please. Paul shook his head in annoyance and slammed the van door shut. The metallic clang sounded like the final slam of the door on Michael's life. The engine roared, the van jolted forward, and disappeared into the thick, stormy rain. Inside the cramped transport vehicle, Michael was jostled with each turn. The steel cuffs cut into his skin. Beside him, another inmate, a long-haired man with tattoos up his arms, let out a guttural laugh. Welcome to hell, old man. Michael didn't respond. He shut his eyes, letting the cold droplets trickle down his wrinkled cheeks. Southfield Correctional Facility emerged from the gray rain. Towering iron gates, concrete walls topped with barbed wire. A world with no room for compassion. Waiting for him was Correctional Officer Anthony Scott. He wore his cap low, face like stone. As Michael stepped down, Anthony gave him a quick glance from head to toe, his lips curling in contempt. Another ragged old man. This season's been generous. Paul handed over the paperwork. Anthony signed carelessly, then ordered. Escort him to Block C, Wing B. A young guard, Victor Ramsey, gripped Michael's cuffed wrist tightly and pushed him forward. As they walked down a long, dim hallway, Michael smelled mold, disinfectant, and a faint metallic scent like blood. The cell door opened. A small, narrow space with stained walls and a moldy mattress on a rusted metal bed. Victor removed the cuffs and shoved Michael inside. The door slammed shut behind him, the metallic echo ringing down the corridor. Michael stood in the middle of the cell, trembling. His legs ached, and old wounds flared up with searing pain. He dragged himself to the bed, collapsed onto it, and buried his head in his scarred hands. Rain pounded against the barred window. Shouts and laughter echoed from other cells. The prison sounded like a monstrous belly swallowing Michael whole. "Oh God," he whispered. "Why have you abandoned me?" No answer came. Only a mocking voice through the wall. "Looks like we've got ourselves a new playmate, boys." Michael curled up like a child. His body frozen, his soul exhausted. A sob broke from his chest. And the backpack, everything he had left, remained behind, cold and forgotten, in the darkened courtroom. Michael Harris sat curled in the corner of the cell, hands over his head. The cold seeped through the stone floor into his bones. Outside the door, the yelling and pounding of other inmates echoed like howls from hell. After some time, footsteps approached. The cell door creaked open, and a figure appeared, Officer Anthony Scott, with another prisoner beside him. "This is your new cellmate," Anthony said bluntly. "Say hello to Andrew Ross." Andrew was a muscular man with a buzz cut and a snake tattoo wrapped around his neck. He gave a sinister grin. "Hey, old man," he said in a gravelly voice. "Hope we get along." Anthony smirked and slammed the door shut. Andrew stepped closer, nudged Michael's leg with his boot. "Name?" "Michael." "Harris," he answered hoarsely. "Harris, huh?" Andrew smirked. "Sounds like military. You a vet?" Michael gave a slight nod. Andrew chuckled darkly. "Well, now you're just another sewer rat like us." He slapped Michael hard on the back, making him sway. "Don't worry, I'll take good care of you, if you know your place, old man. Michael didn't respond. He turned away, his heart heavy. That first night at Southfield Correctional Facility passed under intense tension. Michael lay curled on the moldy mattress, listening to Andrew snore like a chainsaw. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of his old backpack, lying alone on the courtroom table. "Please don't take it," he murmured in his sleep. The next morning, sirens blared through the prison. Michael slowly got up, every muscle aching. The cell door swung open. Another officer, Ralph Sanders, barked, "Line up." To the mess hall. Michael shuffled along with the crowd, dragging his feet over the cold cement floor. Andrew walked beside him and bumped his shoulder. "Move it, old man. If I miss breakfast because of you, I'll grind your bones." In the cafeteria, the stench of spoiled food hung heavy in the air. A long row of dented steel trays, each holding a small serving of watery porridge and a rock-hard slice of bread. Michael received his tray, hands trembling as he looked for a seat. But before he could sit, another inmate, Charles Vega, blocked him. "This is my seat, you old fart," Charles growled, grinning cruelly. Michael backed away, searching for another spot. But everywhere he went, he met hostile stares and mocking smirks. At last, he sat down on the floor in a corner, eating in silence. Every spoonful of porridge slid down his throat like shards of broken glass. Andrew pulled up a chair across from him, feet on the table. "Look at this, guys. Our general's eating like a mangy dog." Laughter erupted around the table. Michael set the spoon down. He couldn't eat anymore. He stood slowly, and his tray spilled to the floor, splattering porridge. A voice called out, "Oh, the old man's getting feisty." Charles Vega charged and shoved Michael hard. He stumbled and fell, hitting his head against the corner of a steel table. Blood trickled from his forehead. Laughter roared through the cafeteria. Officer Ralph saw it happen, but just shrugged and turned away as if nothing had occurred. Michael crawled to his feet, pain radiating from his wound. No one helped. Not a single hand reached out. He limped back to his cell, leaving a trail of blood on the cold stone floor. Inside, Andrew lay on the bed, a hand-rolled cigarette in his mouth. "Listen, old man," he said lazily. "I don't like people making me look weak in front of others. If you ever humiliate me again, I'll show you what hell feels like." Michael said nothing. He sat at the edge of the bed, cradling his bleeding hand. Dim light filtered through the tiny window, casting shadows across his weathered, broken face. A face once hardened by war, now lined with wounds that never healed. Night fell. Michael couldn't sleep. Andrew snored, other inmates banged and yelled obscenities. He curled up, overwhelmed by a crushing despair. "Why?" he whispered. "Why did it come to this?" The image of the backpack came again. Inside it was a photo of him with his comrades Emmett, Stephen, and Captain Franklin, the men he had fought beside in Sarajevo. And now, he was alone, discarded like a broken object. The next day, Michael was summoned to the prison infirmary. Nurse Martha Gordon examined the gash on his forehead and frowned. "Good Lord, who let you get like this?" Michael said nothing. Martha cleaned the wound efficiently. She whispered, "Be careful. Weak people don't last long here." Michael nodded faintly, his heart heavy. On his way back to the cell, he unexpectedly crossed paths with court clerk Lucy Martin, the one who had read his charges. She was at the facility to sign off prisoner transfer documents. Lucy glanced at Michael, her expression wavering. She recognized him, the pitiful man huddled in the rain. You're Harris?" she asked softly. Michael nodded. Lucy pressed her lips together, as if about to say something, but then turned away. A fleeting moment of hope, gone in an instant. That evening, Michael sat on the bed holding a chunk of bread hard as stone. His stomach growled, but his throat felt too tight to swallow. Andrew approached, eyes gleaming with menace. "Hey, old man. I heard you used to be a soldier. Nice. I love a challenge." Before Michael could react, Andrew punched him hard in the stomach. Michael doubled over, collapsing onto the floor. Laughter erupted again. "Get up, soldier boy," Andrew shouted, full of malice. "Get up and fight like you did back in the day." Michael clutched his abdomen, trying to crawl away. Andrew stomped on his hand. Pain shot up to his shoulder. Only when the alarm blared an unexpected inspection alert did Andrew stop, spitting near Michael's head. "You're lucky today, you worthless wreck," he sneered. Michael lay still, gasping. The pain throbbed through every fiber of his body. But worse than the pain was the shame and overwhelming humiliation drowning him in despair. Outside, the rain still fell. 1 week after being beaten by Andrew Ross, Michael Harris became a faded shadow in Southfield Correctional Facility. He moved like a ghost, avoiding the eyes of other inmates, staying clear of the guards' men who saw his existence as a minor inconvenience. That morning, after the siren blared, Michael dragged himself toward the cafeteria. The wound on his forehead had started to scab over, but the bruises on his body still throbbed with pain. While Michael was standing in line to get his meal, a heavy hand slapped his shoulder from behind. "Good morning, old buddy." Andrew's voice rang out, followed by laughter from a group of inmates behind him. Michael didn't turn around. He kept his head down, took the bowl of watery porridge and the rock-hard piece of bread, and found a seat near the wall. But Andrew wasn't done. He strolled over and plopped down across from him, casually snatching the bread from Michael's tray. "You don't need to eat this much, old man," Andrew said, chewing noisily with a crooked smile. Michael clenched his fists, then let them fall. He understood that in this world, resistance only brought more pain. Another inmate, Samuel Torres, approached, holding his tray. Samuel was a sly operator who survived by maneuvering between prison cliques. "I heard," Samuel whispered slyly, "that you used to be a soldier. That true?" Michael didn't answer. Andrew chimed in, "Oh, it's true. Glorious past, now just a walking joke." Samuel chuckled, then leaned over the table. "You know, we've got a bet going on about how long you'll survive." Michael looked up, his eyes detached. 3 months, Samuel grinned. "My money's on 3 months." Andrew high-fived him, both looking pleased. Michael stood, picking up his tray. Laughter followed him like a pack of vultures picking at a corpse. That afternoon, Michael was called to the labor education office where new inmates had to fill out paperwork and sign behavior agreements. The officer in charge was Bella Jameson, a middle-aged woman with a cold demeanor and razor-sharp eyes. "Can you read?" she asked, sounding bored. "Yes," Michael answered softly. "Then sign here." She pushed a commitment form toward him. Michael picked up the pen. His thin, dry hand trembled as he scrawled the name, Michael Harris, across the paper. Bella glanced at it, then said flatly, "Block C, Wing B. No disturbances, no violations, no complaints. Or you already know the consequences." Michael just nodded. On the way back to his cell, he passed the training yard where a group of inmates was brawling viciously. Screams, fists slamming against flesh, it was horrifying. Officer Anthony Scott stood watching from afar, coffee cup in hand, utterly indifferent. One inmate went down, blood covering his face. Michael looked away. He knew better than to intervene. In this place, the weak had no right to protect the weak. Night fell. Michael sat silently on his bed, eyes wide open, staring at the stained ceiling. Andrew snored steadily beside him. Through the small window, the lone moonlight cast his bony, isolated silhouette on the moldy wall. He raised a hand to his chest, where the backpack should have been, where the keepsakes, the remaining fragments of his life, belonged. A sharp pain gripped his chest. My backpack," my memories," he whispered, choking up. "They took everything." No one heard him. Only the weight of night, and the cold hiss of the wind. The next day, Michael was called for visitation. He was surprised. Who would visit him? As he entered the room, he saw a familiar face: David Morgan, the young officer who had hesitated as Michael was dragged out of the courtroom. David sat behind the glass, holding a phone. Michael sat down, lifting the receiver. "Mr. Harris," David began, clearly uneasy. I don't know why I came. I just." Michael stared at him, his eyes bloodshot. David swallowed. "I saw what happened, at court. I'm sorry." Michael pressed his lips together. A late, weak, meaningless apology. But at least for the first time someone was looking at him like a human being. David looked around, then lowered his voice. "Your backpack. I think it's still in the courthouse evidence room." Michael gripped the receiver tightly. Please, can you?" David hesitated. "I'll try." But, he left the sentence unfinished, his eyes full of helplessness. The visit ended quickly. Michael returned to his cell with a flicker of hope, the most dangerous feeling in this kind of hell. That night, Andrew Ross returned to the cell in a foul mood. He'd just lost money in an underground gambling game. As soon as he entered, he shouted, "You stinking old bastard, get over here." Michael hesitated. Andrew lunged, grabbed his collar, and snarled. "You brought bad luck on me, huh? I'll show you what that costs." He shoved Michael hard into the wall. The impact stunned him, his head buzzed. "Get on your knees and apologize," Andrew roared. Michael trembled, but stayed still. Andrew punched him again. "You wanna die?" Michael collapsed, not from fear, but because his body couldn't fight back anymore. "Sorry," he whispered. Andrew laughed loudly and kicked him in the stomach. "What the hell makes you think you can look me in the eye?" Michael curled up, clutching his belly. Andrew spat on the floor beside him. "Useless trash." Laughter erupted from the neighboring cells. Michael lay there, blood dribbling from his mouth, mixing with the grime on the floor. He closed his eyes, letting the pain consume him. Michael Harris woke the next morning aching all over. Every small movement made his bones creak and scream. He crawled off the damp mattress, using the wall for support. Mornings at Southfield Correctional Facility were bitter cold. Fog crept through the halls, soaking into the threads of his tattered clothing. A raspy loudspeaker voice echoed. "Block C inmates, line up for inspection." Michael shuffled behind the others. His ruined shoes soaked up cold water from the floor. In the yard, Officer Anthony Scott waited with two assistants, Foster and Alex Galvez. Anthony barked. "Line up. Move it, you vermin." Foster shouted. "Name." One by one, the prisoners shouted theirs. When it was Michael's turn, he murmured, "Michael Harris." Foster scowled. "Louder, scum." Michael took a breath and repeated, voice trembling. Alex Galvez scribbled on his clipboard. Every time Michael shivered from the cold, Alex smirked. "He looks like a drowned cat," he whispered to Emmett, and both chuckled. After roll call, inmates were divided into labor groups. Michael was assigned to clean the northern stadium, an area full of sludge and trash. He picked up an old broom and dragged his feet across the wet cement. Every time he looked up, he caught the contemptuous stares of the guards. Andrew Ross, also in the group, couldn't resist mocking him. "Look at him working hard like an old mule. Maybe we should tie a bell around his neck." The other inmates burst into laughter. A sharp-edged can sliced Michael's hand, blood oozed out. Anthony Scott saw it but shrugged. "Let it bleed. He's not dying." Michael bent down and wrapped the wound with a torn piece of his shirt. In the cold wind, he whispered, I used to be a soldier. I used to fight for this country. No one listened. At lunch, after the work was done, Michael dragged himself back to the cafeteria. Today's meal was worse than usual, bland, watery porridge and a piece of moldy cheese. He sat at a secluded table and silently ate spoonful after spoonful of cold mush. From a distance, Samuel Torres approached slowly. "Old man," he said, squinting, "I heard someone special's coming to visit you." Michael looked up, weary. "Who?" Samuel shrugged. "Rumor says it's a lawyer. Probably here to finalize your will, 'cause it looks like you won't be around much longer." Andrew laughed loudly. "Or maybe to reserve a spot in the Southfield Correctional Cemetery." The other inmates joined in with rowdy laughter. Michael set his spoon down, his hands trembling. A bit of porridge dripped onto his ragged pants, and he didn't even bother to wipe it off. That afternoon, David Morgan returned. The young officer came with a court clerk, Mrs. Anna Brooks, in charge of evidence storage. Michael was called into the hallway. Anna handed over a document. "We're here to confirm a request for asset release." Michael swallowed. "The backpack, is it still there?" Anna glanced at David, then sighed. "According to regulations, seized items must remain in storage until the case is fully closed. Your belongings are currently held in the evidence vault." Michael clenched his fists, his voice shaking with emotion. "Please, miss, it's my whole life." David looked around nervously. Anna responded coldly. "Rules are rules. I can't make exceptions." She signed the logbook, then turned away. David lingered, then whispered. "I'll try. I promise." Michael nodded, a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. That night, Andrew started again. As soon as he walked into the cell, he yanked Michael up, his breath reeking of prison-brewed alcohol. "Hey old man, I got a question for you." Michael stepped back, cautious. Andrew squinted. "Back in the day, when you were still fighting, did you ever kill someone?" Michael clenched his frail hands. The memories of Sarajevo surged: explosions, terrified faces, bloodied hands. He shook his head. "I'm not proud of anything I did." Andrew burst out laughing. "Jesus, listen to this. We got ourselves a saint." He slapped Michael hard across the face. "There are no saints in here, old man. Just the strong, and the starving." Michael fell against the wall, blood dripping from his nose. Andrew flopped onto his bed, laughing to himself. Michael wiped the blood and stumbled back to his mattress. He curled into a ball, the stench of sweat and mildew stinging his nose. "I just want my backpack," he whispered. "Just that." The next morning, Michael was summoned to the yard for a mandatory, physical training session. It was a newly implemented program meant to instill discipline in inmates. In reality, it was just a brutal exercise and punishment under the blistering sun. Anthony Scott and his assistants, Foster and Alex, stood by with leather whips, watching closely. "Crawl. All of you, crawl across the yard." Anthony barked. Michael, along with dozens of other inmates, was forced to crawl on his elbows across burning hot cement. Every time someone slowed down, a whip cracked down, leaving red welts on their backs. Michael panted heavily, sweat and blood mixing and dripping onto the ground. In the corner, Andrew stood with arms crossed, smirking. "Come on, old man. Let's see what breaks first, your bones or your spirit." Foster passed by and cracked the whip directly across Michael's shoulder. "Keep crawling, you maggot." Michael clenched his teeth and kept dragging himself forward. Every inch was torture. Every breath was a battle for survival. By the end of the training, Michael stumbled back to his cell. He collapsed onto his bed, his whole body battered and bruised. The sky darkened. A storm rolled in, the wind howling through the windows, producing eerie, ghostly sounds. Michael stared out at the gray sky. A dark thought crept into his mind. What if I just ended it all right here? He closed his eyes, hands trembling. In the darkness, only the sound of wind and his weak, fading heartbeat remained. The wind whistled through the cracks in the iron door, seeping into the freezing cell with the scent of rot and mold. Michael Harris curled up on the decaying mattress, arms crossed over his chest. He couldn't sleep. Couldn't rest. Dawn had not yet come. The thick darkness pressed down like a suffocating weight. The rain outside fell steadily, like the slow, dying heartbeat of a man on the brink. Michael whispered, his voice barely more than the wind. God, if you still hear me. There was no answer. Only the soft click of the iron lock turning. A flashlight beam swept across his face. Andrew Ross stood there, a metal rod in hand, his face dark and blank. Awake, old man, he slurred. I've got something fun for you. Michael sat up, eyes tired, no fear, just emptiness. I have nothing left to lose, he said. Andrew grinned. Oh, you've got plenty. Your dignity, for one. That brittle old back of yours, too. I'm gonna crush it. He stepped closer. Michael didn't resist. He knew fighting back would only bring more pain. Andrew raised the rod not to strike, but to press it against Michael's throat. You know what you are, Michael, he whispered. You're a dog. And dogs stay quiet. Michael closed his eyes and tried to breathe evenly. He didn't scream. Didn't beg. The worst part wasn't the violence, it was being treated as if he had no humanity left. Andrew gave a cold laugh, then left, slamming the door behind him. Michael collapsed, drenched in cold sweat. The next morning, dark clouds still covered Southfield Correctional Facility. The prisoners were ordered to gather in the assembly hall for the regular, moral lecture, a superficial event held to impress inspectors. On the stage, a fake pastor, Padre Edward Lopez, read old scripture in a sleepy voice. We must learn to forgive, even in suffering. We must show compassion. From the row of seats, Andrew elbowed Michael. Sounds like some cracked-out hillbilly preacher. Samuel Torres snorted. Didn't expect hell to have a chapel. Michael remained still, eyes fixed on nothing. Edward Lopez's voice droned on. There is light within each of us. So where's the light in old man Harris? Andrew whispered mockingly. Bet it died the day he got sentenced. Michael turned and stared at him. I'm still alive. The words were quiet, but they hit like a rock. The row fell silent for a beat. Andrew laughed loudly, then shoved Michael so hard he slammed into the armrest. Edward paused, glanced over but then resumed preaching as if nothing had happened. Michael said nothing more. He sat upright for the rest of the sermon, never bowing his head. But inside, he felt like he was sinking in a swamp, thick, black, and clinging to his heart. After the service, Michael was sent to the infirmary for a routine checkup. Martha Gordon greeted him with a look of sympathy. You've lost a lot of weight, she whispered. Aren't they feeding you enough? Michael shook his head. I'm eating. There's just nothing left in me to absorb it. Martha looked down. She handed him a few vitamins, whispering. Don't let them break you. Men like you don't deserve to be buried like this. Michael gave a faint smile. I'm nobody. Just a ghost in this machine. On the way back, he passed the main hallway where a plaque listed model inmates. His name wasn't there. Of course. But Andrew Ross's name was. He'd been awarded a 2-day sentence reduction for cooperative labor conduct. Michael stared at the plaque. This world's gone insane, he thought. That night, the prison fell into an eerie silence. No shouting. No crude songs. Michael lay in bed, hollow inside. Then, a soft sound came from the mail slot. A small piece of paper was slid in. Michael opened it. Scrawled handwriting read. Your backpack still exists. Someone is trying to destroy it. Do something before it's too late. No name. No clue. Michael gripped the paper tightly, heart pounding. The backpack. Memories thundered through him. Inside it was the handkerchief Laura, his late wife, had embroidered before he left for war. The medal from fallen comrades. The handwritten thank you letter from Captain Franklin. Artifacts, soul fragments, proof that he once mattered. If he lost it, he'd truly have nothing left. He jumped up and quickly scribbled on another scrap of paper. I need to protect the backpack. I need help. Then he slid it through the mail slot, hoping that whoever sent the note would find it. The next morning, the rain had stopped unexpectedly. But the air was heavier than ever. Anthony Scott entered each cell, announcing routine inspections. When he reached Michael's, he paused and frowned. Who were you writing to? Michael froze. I don't know what you're talking about. Anthony grabbed his collar and snarled. Don't play dumb. This place sees everything. Who told you to whine about that damn backpack? Michael didn't respond. Anthony punched him hard in the stomach. Michael doubled over, coughing violently. Filthy scum. Anthony spat, turning to leave. But before he exited, he threw one last blow. Your backpack will be burned. Tomorrow morning. Michael stood still. His heart raced wildly. No, he whispered. No, it can't be. He slumped onto his bed, drenched in cold sweat. If the backpack was destroyed, what would be left of him? No honor. No family. No one who believed him. No one who remembered. Only the name Michael Harris, vanishing like smoke. That night, he didn't sleep. He stared into the pitch-black sky. Eyes dry. Unblinking. And for the first time in many years, Michael felt truly afraid. Afraid of being forgotten. Afraid of being erased. Afraid that even the past, the one thing he had left, would be taken away. The next morning, the sky over New York remained overcast, gray, as if the entire city was mourning something too painful to name. In cell C-12, Michael Harris sat motionless, eyes fixed on the chipped wall in front of him. He hadn't slept a wink. Anthony Scott's words echoed in his mind like hammers on steel. Your backpack will be burned. Tomorrow morning. And today was that morning. The lock clicked. Foster stepped in, his expression as indifferent as always. Let's go, Harris. You've been ordered to court for final transfer procedures. Michael rose quietly. Every step felt like it was made of lead. He asked no questions. Said nothing. As if every thought in his head had turned to stone. On the transport van, Michael sat between two officers. The vehicle rumbled down a familiar road past the neighborhoods he once walked through as a retired soldier desperately searching for work, past the squares he no longer had the right to enter. The courthouse appeared in front of him, tall, cold, with gray stone walls like the faces of those who had once judged him. A tightness rose in Michael's chest. Not from fear. But from a gut feeling. Today, the last thing he had left in life would truly be gone. At the intake room, Mrs. Anna Brooks, the evidence storage officer, was already present. On the table sat a large cardboard box labeled clearly, Evidence Code 77A, pending destruction. Michael glanced at it. It was his backpack. The dark brown backpack, worn and battered, torn in places but kept cleaner than anything else he'd ever owned. His heart pounded wildly. No, please don't, he murmured. Anna Brooks looked at him with disinterest. You have no right to interfere. According to protocol, evidence no longer in legal use is subject to destruction unless a formal appeal is filed by the defendant or their legal representative. And you, she glanced at the file, have no attorney. Michael stumbled forward, nearly collapsing. Please, let me keep it, it's not evidence. It's my entire past. Anna sighed and cut him off. I follow procedure, sir. Procedure doesn't have feelings. Don't make this harder. Michael screamed, voice cracking, please. It's worthless to anyone but me. Inside are pictures of my wife. My war medals. My injury certificate. I served this country in Bosnia. I risked my life for America. His shouts made some of the clerks look up. But none of them intervened. They glanced briefly, then returned to their computer screens. Anna took a step back and signaled the officers. Foster stepped forward, pulling Michael away from the table. That's enough, he said. Don't make yourself look any worse. That's everything I have, Michael whispered. It's all I have left. He struggled but was too weak. Foster yanked him back, irritated. Stop putting on a show, old man. Michael collapsed into a chair, clutching his face with both hands, sobbing like a child. He, a man who once held a rifle on the battlefield, was now being dragged like a beggar, causing a disturbance at City Hall. In that moment, the door opened. A man walked in. Ryan Owens. The black suit, the crimson tie as vivid as blood. He paused, smirking at the sight of Michael crumpled on the floor. You again? Ryan said with disdain. Haven't you figured it out yet? You don't belong in this world anymore. Michael looked up, eyes filled with tears. Mr. Owens. I'm begging you, don't let them burn my backpack. Ryan laughed. Backpack? God, you're still clinging to that piece of junk. The world runs on power and rules, not on the sob stories of some ragged veteran. He turned to Anna. Follow protocol. Burn it today. Michael screamed and lunged toward the table, but Foster and another officer grabbed him. No, he shouted, voice hoarse. Please, I'm begging you. Anna gave a nod, her voice cold, take him out. The two officers dragged Michael across the tiled floor. His shoes kicked backward, heels scraping, leaving streaks of mud and dried blood from old wounds. He looked back, one final glance at the backpack. No one in the room looked after him. No one paused. No one said a word. 3 days later, something unexpected happened at the state courthouse. That morning, the sky over New York was unusually clear. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of courtroom 3, reflecting off the oak desk where Judge Albert Grant sat, slowly flipping through a thick file. Judge Grant was known for being cold, disciplined, emotionally detached from anything outside the law. But this morning, he suddenly stopped at a name, Michael Harris. He had sentenced that man. A fast, merciless trial. No real defense. He didn't remember the face, but the name made his finger freeze. A strange feeling stirred. Grant straightened and opened the full, unredacted file, the one not publicly released. A worn sheet of paper slipped out. Its edges yellowed and folded, but the print remained legible. Harris, Michael Sargent, Special Forces, Bosnia, Sarajevo 1995. Beneath that, scrawled in faded handwriting. Saved Lieutenant Albert Grant during a shelling on July 14, in the New Hope district. Grant froze. His eyes widened. His trembling hands clenched the paper. The room was oppressively silent. He stood abruptly. The chair behind him slammed into the wall. No, it can't be, he whispered, his mouth dry. Grant pulled out his phone and dialed an internal number. Lucy, he said urgently, bring me the original case file for Michael Harris. All of it. Now. And cancel every hearing scheduled for this morning. His secretary sounded startled. Sir, is everything okay? Don't ask. Just do it. 10 minutes later, court clerk Lucy Martin entered, carrying another stack of files. Grant snatched it from her hands, flipping quickly through the pages. Why does the original file state that he was Special Forces, decorated, and saved my life, but none of that was ever brought up. Who edited the trial documents? Lucy went pale. Sir. The summary was provided by the prosecution. I only read the version approved by the Justice Department and Prosecutor Owens. Grant narrowed his eyes. Owens. He gripped the file, fury rising. Call him. Now. Lucy trembled and stepped out. 10 minutes later, Ryan Owens entered composed, confident. You called for me, he said politely, eyes gleaming with defiance. Grant tossed the document onto the desk. Explain this. Owens glanced at it briefly. Oh, that's a section not directly relevant to the charges. Michael Harris was a veteran, sure. But the assault happened. His service history doesn't erase the crime. You deliberately omitted every detail about his past. Grant barked. Owens shrugged. Legal strategy. We focused on present behavior. Military history doesn't absolve assault. You used this courtroom as a stepping stone for your election campaign, Grant snapped, eyes red. I warned you once, justice doesn't serve personal ambition. Owens smirked. And you? You handed down the sentence without a second thought. You ignored that man's desperate pleas. Grant was stunned. Owens continued, if he saved your life, then you just destroyed his. A storm of rage swelled inside Grant. But deep down, he knew Owens was right. He had been a silent accomplice. Immediately, Judge Grant convened an emergency internal review. The entire case against Michael Harris was re-evaluated, this time, in full. Previously uncalled witnesses were identified. Statements from aid centers had been ignored. Security footage showed Michael only trying to retrieve his backpack, not assaulting anyone. The entire conviction was a brutal miscarriage of justice. Grant stood and declared. We must act. Today. A call was made to Southfield Correctional Facility. That afternoon, Michael Harris lay on his bed, his head resting on a bony arm, eyes closed as if waiting to disappear. The loudspeaker crackled. Inmate Harris, prepare for transport. Emergency court summons. He didn't open his eyes. No. I'm not going anywhere, he murmured. Andrew Ross, in the next bunk, chuckled. Getting more time added? Good luck, old man. A guard walked in, yanked Michael up. Get up. Judge's orders. Michael didn't understand. He didn't react. He had lost all faith. Still, they pulled him onto the van. Once again, his hands were cuffed. Head down. Rain still drizzling. When the vehicle stopped in front of the state courthouse, Michael looked up. Court, again, he rasped. But this time was completely different. Not from the back. Not dragged. No contemptuous stares. Young Officer David Morgan met him, gently removed the cuffs, and spoke softly. Mr. Harris, Judge Grant has requested to see you personally. Michael looked confused. He was led into a private room. Judge Grant stood at the center, his robe removed, holding a file. As Michael stepped in, Grant turned around. They stared at each other. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Grant fell to his knees. In front of everyone. He bowed his head, voice shaking. Mr. Harris, you saved my life in Sarajevo. Michael stood frozen. July 14, 1995, Grant continued, voice trembling. The shelling. I was trapped under collapsed walls. You risked your life to pull me out. I remember your eyes. I remember your blood pouring. I remember you shouting at me, you're not dying here, Lieutenant. The room was dead silent. David Morgan lowered his head. Lucy Martin covered her mouth. The guards stood motionless. And Michael Harris, for the first time in years, sank slowly into the chair. And now, Grant continued, voice cracking, I repaid you by letting you be dragged out of this courthouse in handcuffs, losing everything. I don't deserve to be called a man, let alone a judge. Michael said nothing. His eyes closed. Tears streamed down his face naturally, like the rain in New York. Grant stood up. Ryan Owens will be investigated for tampering with records and violating professional ethics. Your charges are dismissed immediately. Anne. He turned to the clerk. Order, all personal belongings are to be returned to Michael Harris. And the City of New York is hereby obligated to issue a public apology, provide housing, and lifelong medical care. A moment of silence hung over the room. Then Lucy Martin stepped forward, holding the worn-out backpack, the same one that had been discarded, now cradled like a priceless treasure. She placed it in Michael's hands and choked up. I'm sorry. I couldn't stop what happened. Michael held the backpack to his chest, his hands trembling. He broke down in tears. Not a cry of anguish, but the cry of a soul finally returned to its body. That morning, Courtroom 3 was unlike any proceeding in the history of the New York judicial system. The gallery was packed with spectators. Reporters, news crews, and radio stations filled every corner. Rumors of a historic ruling by Judge Albert Grant had spread in hours, turning the usually cold courtroom into a pressure cooker. Michael Harris sat in the center of the room, no longer handcuffed, no longer hunched over. He wore a new coat brought by David Morgan himself, replacing the ragged one he used to wear. In his arms, he clutched his restored backpack, the living evidence of his life. Judge Grant entered, his face calm but his eyes heavy, as if holding a silent tragedy that had stretched across 3 decades. The gavel struck. Silence, please. The room held its breath. Grant looked around, then fixed his gaze on Michael. His voice rang out, each word deliberate. Today's session is not to prosecute anyone. It is to publicly correct an unforgivable mistake. The crowd stirred. Grant held up a document. This is a record that clearly states, in 1995, Sergeant Michael Harris of the U.S. Special Forces risked his life to save fellow soldiers, including me, then Lieutenant Albert Grant, in Bosnia. A wave of murmurs swept the courtroom. This same man, Grant said, voice faltering, was rushed through trial, stripped of a proper defense, convicted, and humiliated before the public, all because of the apathy and political ambition of one individual. All eyes turned toward the prosecution table, but Ryan Owens was no longer there. After the internal review, he had been suspended and was awaiting disciplinary action in criminal charges for deliberate falsification of legal records. Grant continued. Therefore, this court declares, all charges against Michael Harris are hereby nullified. His record expunged, his name restored. The City of New York is ordered to issue a formal apology, provide permanent housing, lifelong healthcare, and legal support should he choose to pursue action against those responsible. Another moment of silence. Then came applause, at first scattered, then building, warm and thunderous. The entire courtroom erupted. A female reporter from CNN wiped tears from her cheeks. A man in the back row stood, placing his hand over his heart. Even court staff, those who once turned a blind eye to Michael's pain, now bowed their heads in remorse. Lucy Martin stepped to the witness stand, her voice trembling. I was the clerk during his first trial. I'm sorry. I read that indictment without checking. I have no excuse. Michael simply shook his head. I don't blame anyone. I only wanted to be heard. To live like a person with a voice. Grant stepped down from the bench. He wore no robe now, just plain clothes, his expression solemn. He walked up to Michael, the man who had once pulled him from rubble in Sarajevo. And in front of everyone, Judge Albert Grant dropped to his knees. The room went still. Mr. Harris, he said, meeting his eyes, I owe you my life. Without you, I would have died 30 years ago. And then I let you die again, this time in dignity. Today, I bow to you. Michael could hardly believe what he was seeing. He stammered. Please, sir, stand up. Grant remained kneeling. No. Today, I am the one being judged. Not you. The applause erupted again, deafening. The New York courtroom had never seen anything like it, a renowned judge on his knees, begging forgiveness from a man once treated as society's garbage. Michael stood, holding the backpack tightly against his chest, his voice breaking. All I ever wanted was for someone to see me as a human being. That's enough. Lucy stepped forward and gently unzipped the backpack. What was inside? An old photo of Michael with his fellow soldiers in Bosnia. In the photo, every face was young, every gaze sharp as steel. A handwritten letter, to Sergeant Harris, the man who keeps his word. A handkerchief embroidered with the name Laura, his wife. And a small, faded medal. Still gleaming under the courtroom lights. David Morgan choked up, you kept it all, for all these years? Michael nodded slowly. It's all I had. Proof that my life once meant something. Grant took his hand. And starting today, everyone will know that. Not because you were a soldier. But because you are a human being worthy of dignity, respect, and love. A week later, the story swept across America. The front page of National Enquirer read. Wrongfully convicted veteran redeemed, all of America weeps. National News aired the footage of Judge Grant on his knees. Millions watched and cried. On WNYC radio, Michael Harris was interviewed from his new apartment courtesy of the city, a small, cozy home with morning sunlight and a balcony overlooking Central Park. The host asked. If you could go back in time, would you change anything? Michael stared off into the distance. I'd still save him. Even knowing how I'd be treated afterward. Because people only deserve to live if they still know how to save others, not for recognition or reward, but because it's the right thing to do. At a special ceremony organized by the Department of Defense in Union Square, the very place where he'd once been mocked, Michael was honored as the soldier without medals, but with a dignity greater than any award. Hundreds stood and applauded. People who had once shunned him now stood side by side, holding hands. Andrew Ross, watching from prison, turned away in silence. Ryan Owens, now disbarred and facing multiple charges, sat pale amid stacks of legal documents. Michael, the man once dragged from the witness stand like a criminal, now stood on the podium of honor as a symbol. And he spoke just one sentence. Gratitude can save a lost soul. But justice, that's what saves a society. The room thundered with applause. He bowed. Face calm. Eyes bright. And for the first time in decades, Michael Harris smiled the smile of a man who had been given everything back. The story of Michael Harris is a profound reminder that human dignity cannot be determined by circumstance, status, or society's indifference. A man once broken and humiliated, if he lives with integrity and heart, can have his honor restored. Justice is not the cold silence of law, it is the courageous act of making things right and admitting wrongs. And above all, gratitude, even if late, has the power to redeem not just a person, but an entire community.